everyone, I'm Courtney. Today, I'm going to tell you about my time living in Ohio. I lived in Ohio for 3 years. I lived in Ohio from 2019 to 2022. I lived in a town called Sandusky, Ohio. Sandusky, Ohio is located in northern Ohio. It is about an hour south of Toledo. Toledo is 1 hour north of where I lived. Sandusky, Ohio is known for an amusement park. Sandusky is known for an amusement park called Cedar Point. Cedar Point is one of the best amusement parks in the US. A lot of people debate, but in my opinion, it's unmatched. Cedar Point has a lot of roller coasters. When I lived in Ohio, my husband and I got the season pass. We could go into Cedar Point whenever we wanted. And we rode a lot of roller coasters. It was fun. The park is located on a little peninsula. A peninsula is kind of like an island, but it's attached with a small strip of land. Anyways, I loved living close to Cedar Point. Sandusky, Ohio has about 20,000 residents. In my opinion, it's the perfect size town to live in. It has a lot of restaurants and things to do. It has a lot of things to do and places to eat because of the tourism in the area. There's a lot of tourism because of the amusement park, because of Cedar Point. My husband and I lived in an apartment. Our apartment was very affordable. Our apartment, the rent was very cheap. We paid $500 a month for our apartment. In comparison, it's very cheap in comparison to other places. Our apartment wasn't brand new, but it was good enough. We liked living in our apartment. Our apartment had a balcony. Our cats would go out onto the balcony and sit and watch the birds. One thing I liked about living in Ohio, about living in Sandusky, Ohio, was that my job was very close to our apartment. My first job that I had when I lived in Sandusky was working at a sporting goods store. I worked at a store that sells equipment to play sports. I worked at a store that sells things like baseball bats, running shoes, yoga pants, things like that. I liked working at the sporting goods store. I would run to work. Sometimes I would run to work. It was 2.2 miles to work. So, if I ran to work and then after work I ran home, it was 4.4 miles. I also had a running group when I lived in Ohio. I had a running group that met at 5:30 a.m. every Wednesday morning. It was really early, but I always went. The group was fun. There was one guy in the group that was 80 years old. He was still running. I liked running with my running group on Wednesday mornings. We would run around the lake. Sandusky, Ohio is on the edge of a big lake. We would run along the lake and we would watch the sunrise. It was a lot of fun. Another thing I liked about living in Ohio is that my climbing gym had a lot of good people. My climbing gym in Ohio is where I met a lot of my best friends. My climbing gym was a 30-minute drive from our house. My climbing gym was a little bit far, but it was okay. When I was in Ohio, I loved walking outside. I loved walking around town. I also loved hanging out with my friends. My best friend of all time is a friend that I met when I lived in Ohio. I would go over to their house and play board games. My husband, myself, them, and the rest of our friends would have board game nights. It was fun because they lived very close. They lived about a mile away. Sometimes my husband and I would walk or ride our bikes to my friend's house, and we would play board games. It was really fun. There also were good restaurants in town. I really liked a pizza restaurant that had a pizza with pears on top. I know, it sounds a little bit weird, but it's really good. There was also a restaurant that served pho. I love pho. It's kind of like ramen, but it's a little bit different. Another thing that I liked to do when I was in Sandusky, Ohio, is go to the merry-go-round museum. A merry-go-round is a type of carnival ride. It's a big ride that has poles with horses on them. The horses move up and down, and the merry-go-round spins in a circle. The ride is generally for kids, but the museum was very interesting. The museum talked about the history of merry-go-rounds and talked about how the horses and the entire mechanical system behind a merry-go-round works. I loved the merry-go-round museum. I loved Sandusky, Ohio. It was very peaceful. I had 2 other jobs besides the sporting goods store when I worked in Ohio. I worked at a storage rental facility. People could rent lockers to store their belongings. I worked there every Monday. I worked there just because the woman working there needed a little bit of extra help. So I worked there every Monday. Eventually, when the pandemic came in 2020, my sporting goods store was cutting hours. They were not having people work as much. There was a local homebrew supply store. A homebrew supply store is a store that sells things to make beer and wine. I started working at the homebrew supply store doing social media. I was in charge of making content for their Instagram and their YouTube pages. I also was in charge of sending out customer emails. I loved working at the homebrew supply store. It was really fun. I had a coworker there that I loved. He loved football. He would always put football podcasts on while we were working. I don't like football, but it was cute to see how passionate he was about football. My boss at the homebrew store was really funny. We got along really well. Every Thursday, we would go on Instagram. We would record a live video and we would drink a glass of beer or a glass of wine. It was a fun job. Eventually, I got a job offer from a running company. The job was in Pennsylvania, where I'm living now. And that's why we moved from Ohio to Pennsylvania. If you want to know more about why I like Pittsburgh, you can watch this video next. If you want to know more about why I like Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, watch this. I'm Courtney. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you later. Bye.